My name is Thomas Blackwood, and I have been a night watchman at the Tower of London for nearly 2 decades. I thought I had seen everything in this ancient place, with its stone walls steeped in history and blood. But what happened last night? Well, it changed everything. As I write this with trembling hands, I can still feel the icy cold that gripped me, hear the whispers echoing in my mind. This is the story of how I discovered that the legends about the tower are more than just tales to scare tourists. And now I fear it may be too late to escape. It all began on a particularly cold and damp autumn night. A dense fog covered the tower grounds like a ghostly shroud, swallowing the lamplight and turning the shadows into dancing shapes. I was making my usual rounds, my footsteps echoing in the stone corridors. The smell of mold and antiquity was stronger than usual, as if the very walls were exhaling the secrets of the past. It was when I passed by the old chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula that I noticed something different. A soft sound, almost imperceptible, reached my ears. It sounded like a distant wail, like the muffled cry of a woman. I stopped, gripping the lantern more tightly, and strained to listen. The sound ceased as quickly as it had begun, leaving only the oppressive silence of the night. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen more frequently. Objects moved when I turned my back. The keys on my ring jingled by themselves, as if someone were touching them. And the worst part, I began to have terrible nightmares every night. In the dreams, I saw myself dressed in clothes from a past era, walking through the corridors of the tower. But it wasn't the tower I knew. It was older, darker. The air was thick with the metallic smell of blood and the distant sound of agonized screams. And always, at the end of the corridor, there was a figure in a long, dark dress, with her head bowed. When she turned, I would wake up screaming, drenched in cold sweat. The other guards began to notice my altered state. Deep circles marked my face, and I seemed constantly distracted, always looking over my shoulder. Some asked if I was all right, but how could I explain? They would think I was going mad. It was then that I met Margaret, a new tour guide who had recently started working at the tower. She was different from the other employees, with an air of mystery and eyes that seemed to see beyond what was in front of them. One day, while I was making my morning rounds, she approached me. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" she asked in a low voice, her eyes fixed on mine. A shiver ran down my spine. "Seen what?" I replied, trying to sound casual. Margaret looked around, as if afraid of being overheard. "The signs, the changes. Something is happening here, Thomas. Something that has been dormant for centuries is awakening." Her words made my stomach churn. Part of me wanted to deny it, to say she was imagining things. But another part, the part that had experienced the past few nights of terror, knew she was right. Margaret told me about an old legend, little known even among the tower's historians. It spoke of a macabre ritual performed centuries ago, when the tower was still used as a prison and execution site. A ritual that supposedly imprisoned a malevolent entity in the very foundations of the place. "But something has changed," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The seal is breaking, and if we don't do something, what is trapped here will be set free." I wanted to laugh, to tell her it was madness. But the words got stuck in my throat when I saw the reflection of a dark figure in the window glass behind her. When I turned around, there was nothing there. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. Employees began to mysteriously disappear, only to reappear days later, confused and unable to remember where they had been. Tourists reported frightening experiences. Cold touches on their shoulders, voices whispering in their ears, even visions of shadowy figures in the corners of the rooms. And then, on a particularly dark night, everything came to a head. I was making my rounds when I heard a piercing scream coming from the direction of the bloody tower. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got there, I found Margaret lying on the ground, her skin pale as wax.
"It's too late," she whispered as I knelt beside her. "He's free." At that moment, the lights flickered and went out. The darkness that enveloped us was more than the absence of light. It was a living, pulsating presence. And from the midst of that darkness, emerged a figure I knew well from my nightmares. It was a woman, or something that had once been a woman. Her long, dark dress seemed made of swirling shadows. Her skin was a sickly white, marked with dark veins. And when she lifted her head, I saw she had no eyes, just empty, black sockets. "And Bullen," Margaret murmured beside me, her voice barely audible. The figure smiled, a smile full of sharp teeth and promises of pain. "Not anymore," she said, her voice like the sound of bones breaking. "Now, I am vengeance incarnate." What followed was a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. The entity that had once been and Bullen moved through the tower like a storm of centuries-old fury and pain. Objects flew through the air, glass shattered, and screams echoed throughout the complex. Margaret grabbed my hand, her eyes full of determination despite the evident terror. "There's still a chance," she said. "The ritual, we have to complete it again." Following her frantic instructions, we ran through the tower's corridors, collecting the necessary items. A candle made of pure beeswax, a handful of earth from the site of the old gallows, a ceremonial dagger kept deep in the armory. All the while, we could hear the entity's rage behind us, its malevolent presence spreading like an infection. Finally, we reached the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Margaret began to recite words in a language I did not recognize, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. I lit the candle, spread the earth in a circle around us, and held the dagger with trembling hands. The entity burst through the chapel door, its roar of rage making the walls tremble. But Margaret did not stop. She continued the chant, her voice now almost overpowering the creature's howls. "Now, Thomas," she shouted, "use the dagger." With a swift motion, I cut my palm, letting the blood drip onto the earth. The pain was intense, but nothing compared to the terror I felt as the entity advanced on us. There was a blinding flash of light, a scream that seemed to come from 1,000 throats at once, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the chapel was in ruins. Margaret lay beside me, unconscious but alive, and in the center of the circle of earth, there was only a small silver medallion. The weeks that followed were a blur of interrogations, investigations, and repairs. The official story was of a fire caused by old wiring. No one wanted to hear about malevolent entities or ancient rituals. Margaret recovered but decided to leave her job at the tower. Before she left, she handed me the medallion we found in the chapel. "Keep it safe," she said. "What was trapped is now contained here, but not forever." Today, years after that terrible night, I still work as a guard at the Tower of London. For the tourists, I tell the old ghost stories and legends. But at night, when the shadows lengthen and the wind whispers among the ancient stones, I know there is more truth in those stories than anyone dares to imagine. The medallion is always with me, hanging on a chain around my neck. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, I can feel it pulse faintly, like a beating heart. And I wonder, how long until the seal breaks again? And when it does, will we be ready? As I write these words, I look out the window of my small room in the tower. The fog is forming again, swallowing the city lights. And for a moment, just for an instant, I see a reflection in the glass. A woman in a long, dark dress, with empty sockets where her eyes should be. She smiles at me, a smile full of dark promises. And I know, with a certainty that chills my soul, that our battle is far from over. The horror of the Tower of London still lives, patiently waiting for the moment to break free once more.